Well, welcome core members to our this next session of our Summer Institute for this year. We're going to be building on the basics of literacy education, but we're going to branch off from what our elementary and early childhood peers are doing to look at some of the unique ways that we teach literacy in a content specific area like we do in secondary education. So I'm going to give me just a second to get my screen shared. Uh, Somewhere between fourth and seventh grade, schools start to separate content areas into different classrooms. Instead of having all of the classroom, all subjects taught in one classroom, you have a separate math and science and social studies and ELA classrooms. It may be tempting to think that literacy is the job of the ELA teacher. The math teacher teaches math and the science teacher teaches science. But the reality is, as noted by Vaca, and Mraz, even though the majority of students learn how to read in elementary school with some degree of proficiency, they must learn how to adapt reading and thinking strategies to meet the peculiarities and conceptual demands of each discipline they study. So while students should be familiar with strategies for phonemic awareness, for phonics, fluency, comprehension, vocabulary development by the time that they get to your class, you will need to teach them to adapt those strategies to further develop their reading skills for the demands of the fields of mathematics, science, social studies, and more. And when you add to that the reality that in any given middle school classroom may have as many as 7 different reading levels, the best conclusion is that every classroom is a literacy classroom. For students who develop the kind of deep understanding, in order for students to develop the kind of deep understanding of an area like, I'm going to be using the example of math because I'm a math teacher. But in order for them to understand, to have the deep understanding of math that secondary education and the professional world demand of them, they need to be able to think like a professional in the field of mathematics would. That means being able to read mathematical text like a professor would, like a professional would, as well as being able to write and explain their thinking with the same kind of precision. Furthermore, besides preparing students to understand math, science, and social studies, we are preparing them to be professionals in the modern world. And in that world, writing is a threshold skill. Writing is the kind of skill that will make or break. It'll open doors or it'll slam them shut. That means that students need to be competent in many different kinds of literacy. Not just being able to, not just having like the fine art literacy, but also being literate in things like mathematics and science and beyond. They need to be literate in even beyond our subject areas. They need to be literate in collaborating with others, in communication, in visual literacy. They need to be able to know how to put together a presentation. They need to be literate in technology, and they need to be literate in multiculturalism as well. This means that besides being able to do mathematics or be able to do science, they need to have experience collaborating, reasoning with peers, expressing disagreement, seeking feedback from peers and from instructors, all of that as part of how they learn. So in our multimedia world, aspiring professionals need to understand the value of design in appealing to what attracts and sustains attention. I included this quote here from Saunders, who writes that it is widely acknowledged that we live in an information society. one in which information is being produced and disseminated at an exponential rate, and where information literacy, or the ability to locate, access, evaluate, and use information, is required in order to fully participate and be successful in school, work, and everyday life. Very notably, she also writes that information as a human right must be coupled with information literacy, because as we've often seen, a lack of critical engagement with online resources can lead to misinformation and deception. So to have access to abundant information and not be able to critically engage with it is often hurting students more than we're helping them. So while many of our students are aptly acquainted with the use of technology, it's also important for them to learn to be transformative digital citizens, to use the phrase of Zaguris Co. Students who are capable of criticism, reflection, and research. And so therefore, in our classrooms, students need experience conducting research, organizing their findings, sharing it with peers, and they need explicit instruction in formalizing precise search terms, navigating search engines and databases, and critically evaluating the results. Additionally, today's students are pioneers in an increasingly diverse America and an increasingly globalizing world. Cultural diversity increases problem-solving ability, creativity, and innovation. And students need to have cross-cultural learning experiences to equip them to navigate both the challenges and the opportunities of the reality of the world that they live in. So we've already discussed how, in order for students to understand the content area, it's important for them to be able to read and write in the specific ways of that content area. In fact, students will be more capable of understanding the content area the more developed their basic reading skills are. And so it's really important that we continue to invest in and help them hone their basic reading skills. So while it might feel like teaching reading strategies in science is taking away from being able to teach science, in reality, it's supporting it. In a small study by Learned, Morgan, and Liu, science students expressed that they felt more supported and cared for when their teacher integrated literacy strategies in her science teaching. And so we want to look at what might this look like in a classroom setting, by discussing how we might adapt some of the strategies for each of these 5 areas for a content-specific classroom. Starting off with phonemic awareness, that means being able to hear, identify, and manipulate sounds. One strategy that you'll want to try in your classroom is it's syllabifying words. It's when you break down a word by syllable to understand how to say it and define new terms. And so you might look at a word like biology, and you'll break it down into the parts of bio and logi. You break it down into those parts and talk about what those mean. A second strategy that you might want to try is blending and segmenting words. That's when you identify words that follow a similar pattern. So sticking with what we already talked about with biology, you might look at some other words like zoology, geology, meteorology, and you might take a word like biology and compare it to biologist. All right, take biology and biologist, and what are the parts that are similar in those 2 words, and what's different? How does that help you to understand what those 2 words mean and what's different between those? Moving on to the second pillar of phonics. And phonics is finding the connection between letters and sounds. One strategy that you can use there is to refresh decoding skills whenever you're introducing new words. As we get into particular content areas, the words that are used in each content areas are often a lot more complex. They have a lot more syllables. They're not as easy as the sight words that students recognize in younger grades. And so being able to refresh those same decoding skills so that these more complex words can start to feel more familiar also. Another strategy is to, um, instead of writing, when you're introducing a new word, instead of writing the word down, start off with just saying it. Pronounce the word. Break it into spoken syllables, and then write it one syllable at a time. And then finally discuss the meanings of the parts of the word. And so if you're using a word like atmosphere, you might break it down into atmosphere. Atmos is a Greek word for vapor, and sphere is the Greek word for a globe or a ball. And so the word atmosphere, as you put that together, it's describing a sphere, a ball of vapor. And as you can break it down into those parts, it helps students to be able to picture it and to be able to connect the letters and the sounds that it makes until that word becomes fluent for them. So that leads us into our fifth pillar of fluency. Uh, one strategy that you can use with teaching fluency is to explicitly teach a few instructional routines for reading strategically. The way you do this in science or social studies might be different from the way that you would do it for math. But for one way that I would do this for math is I teach students to, when they take a word problem, to just read it slowly and then go back and read it again, this time underlining key words that tell them what operation they're going to be using. Is this asking about subtraction? Is this asking about multiplication? I tell them to highlight any numbers that are in the problem. And then to try to identify which numbers are relevant, because not all the numbers will be relevant. And so that kind of a routine of how to go about reading is a good way to that you as a teacher can teach your students to engage with text from your field. Another strategy that you can use is to have audio assisted readings. This is also a good strategy for students who just need some more help with reading also, because for students to read along with the text, but also to hear it read by a professional, they get to hear how these words are supposed to sound, how they get to hear how it sounds in context, and that helps them to build their fluency skills. Moving on to the next pillar of comprehension, where fluency might help students develop confidence in their reading ability. Comprehension helps them to give value and meaning to their reading, which is an important part of reading at this stage. Being able to explain one's thoughts in writing helps students to more precisely and accurately understand their own thinking, as well as the content area itself. And students who are consistently exposed to both writing and reading reflect more critical thinking about what they read. This kind of critical thinking is crucial in every content area. That's exactly the kind of critical thinking that we're trying to get them to. And so one valuable strategy is to have students practice writing every single day. This can be an informal kind of writing, like a reading log in which they simply describe what they learned and how they feel about it. or it can be a more formal response to an essay question, or it can be a formal summary of what they've learned. A second strategy is just as something kind of fun is to create anagrams. And so if you take a word and rearrange the letters, that's a strategy that's actually been proven to increase student reading comprehension. Moving on to the last pillar then of vocabulary. And this is especially important as we start to get into more specialized fields, because they're going to be learning more and more specialized vocabulary for each field. But one effective strategy for both comprehension and vocabulary development is outlined in a paper by Kelly and Clausen Grace. It takes a familiar strategy of picture walks. You might be familiar with picture walks. It's when you read like a storybook and you flip through the pictures before you start to read. Before you start to read anything, you flip through the pictures, you look at what's on the page, and it helps you get familiar with the context instead of the characters that you might see in the story. And then you can start kind of predicting what do I expect the story to be about. So they encourage you to do the same thing, but what they call it a text feature walk. And in that text feature walk, they encourage you to have to teach students in pairs or in small groups to walk through the text together. Look at the heading, look at the subheadings, look at the notes and the margins in the any graphs or charts, pictures or captions, and read through each of those text features before you ever start reading the text. Encourage students to think about what they expect this to be about, what they expect to learn about, and then get into the reading of the text. Another strategy is to just isolate a few key terms to focus on for each lesson. That way, rather than attempting to have them learn a pile of words superficially, it's more effective for students to learn one or two words at a time as their understanding builds. Research shows that digital tools overwhelmingly offer more opportunities for students to be creative, collaborative, and to see a purpose for their writing. And as we've seen from the beginning of this, giving students opportunities to be creative and practice collaboration is one of the greatest gifts that we can give to students who are preparing for a world beyond schooling. Using technology in the classroom can allow the teachers to differentiate learning for different groups of students. So instead of every student getting the same experience where the teacher is in the front of the room talking to the whole group of the whole class. Instead, using technology, a teacher can just record like a concise video that you want them to hear from you. They can watch the video, they can read a text, they can look through graphic organizers, they can go onto class forums where they can have discussions. And all of that allows students to encounter a differentiated learning experience based on their level of understanding. Using technology can set the teacher free, because if you're able to hand the learning over to students more quickly, and that frees you. So instead of standing in the front explaining how to do the problem, or I'm using the math example, or instead of you standing in the front explaining the concept, you're able to walk around and to respond to student questions, respond to misconceptions, or work with students who need remedial help. Most importantly, using online learning platforms like Google Classroom allows the classroom materials and work to be accessible and visible when the students go home also. That's key for parents, that Parents are able to see what their kids are learning about. They're able to see how their children are being evaluated. It allows teachers to give feedback for students beyond the classroom in real time. And it allows just a lot more transparency where parents feel like they uh, have a better understanding of what their kids are learning and what their kids are doing. For teachers, the most important literacy that you can develop is the understanding of your students, being literate in who they are, knowing exactly who is in the room, who they are, what they're capable of, what language fluency they possess, what competencies they have, uh, what cultural knowledge they bring with them. All of that will help you to accommodate the lesson to effectively teach. Everything about each student, from a disability to an advanced understanding, from poverty and homelessness to family situations, from immigration status to language proficiency. Everything about each student shapes their ability to engage with the material. And ultimately, the goal of teaching isn't just to efficiently cover all the material that the curriculum requires. The goal of teaching, as Phipps defines it, is to create a learner who is independent, who knows the strategies that they need for the task at hand, who's able to set goals for themselves. And so you have to decide what kinds of actions and expressions that you're going to use and that you want from the students so that they can become that kind of independent learner. But research has demonstrated that students whose teachers have received professional development training in working with special populations outperform their peers by more than a full grade level. So the more that you invest in this, the more that the more that gives your students an opportunity to thrive. And so, two strategies that I want you to focus on, because I've realized that trying to focus on so many things from abilities, disabilities to language comprehension to there's so many things to be focused on. So I want you to focus on just two things that you can do. And the first is just do your homework. Uh, Learn as much as you can. Read the IEP contracts and 504 plans for any student in your class for whom one is available. Talk to other teachers, especially teachers who have had your students before. Ask them about what insights they have about the competencies and challenges for each student in your class. Reach out to parents at home. That's especially important because parents have a lot of insight on their kids. And there might be a lot of things that are too personal for you to ask about. But you can always ask, what do you think your child needs from me as their teacher? In addition to students with disabilities, find out all you can about students with advanced abilities. Unlike students with disabilities, there's no mandate to evaluate or assess the capacities of gifted and talented students. And so as Phipps notes, that actually leaves them as a very vulnerable group, a group that's very prone to being overlooked. Research is beginning to demonstrate that things like family income is a major predictor of a child's achievement. Studies have shown that immigrant students who maintain a strong identification with their culture and native language are more likely to succeed academically and to have a more positive concept of their ability to learn. All of these things are reasons why it's important to know what's going on for students at home, what's going on for students beyond just the classroom. And the second thing is to offer choice. I included this quote here from Zagouras Co. that teachers who provide students with choice, challenging tasks, and collaborative inquiry opportunities strengthen their motivation to read and comprehend text. And it's not just about reading text. When you offer students choice, whether it's a choice in how they go about learning, like watching a video, reading an article, solving a problem in a group, doing independent research. Maybe you give them a choice in how they demonstrate what they've learned with an art project or a written statement or a Vimeo recording or um, Flipgrid recording. That was actually what I was thinking of. Or having them come up with write quiz questions themselves to try to stump each other or to stump you as the teacher. Whenever you give students choice, you encourage them to think critically and you build their self-confidence. When you offer students choices, you engage them in the learning process. And designing lessons that engage the students and get their attention, assessing appropriately and recognizing the students as individuals are all important pieces of good content teaching. We've learned that students need not just good learning opportunities, but they need opportunities to be able to learn with their hands, to do things, to be creative, and to be generous. So I also included this quote here from Vaca and Mraz that effective teachers don't sidestep the difficult students. And difficult might mean something different for each of you. Difficult might mean a student with a disability. Difficult might mean a student with advanced abilities and you don't know what to do to give them something meaningful, give them meaningful work. Difficult might be for you someone who is not fluent in English. Difficult for you might be someone with behavioral issues. But effective teachers don't sidestep the difficult students in order to work with those who are more likely to score well on tests. Effective teachers expect improvement in everyone, including themselves. So expect improvement in yourself. Thanks for joining us. We will look for, that's all we've got for today. So I'll look for you guys in the next session. I hope you guys enjoy your break.